Welcome to Something Positive for Positive People. I'm Courtney Brain. Something Positive for Positive People is a 501c3 nonprofit organization that supports people navigating herpes stigma. At Something Positive for Positive People, we believe I'm not going to do all of that. I couldn't do that with a straight face.
You were doing a great job.
I appreciate it. Yeah, it sounded like I was reading off something, didn't it?
I know you had it down.
Yeah, it's just boring, right?
Yeah.
It really doesn't speak to my personality, right? Like over the years, Something Positive has been a suicide prevention awareness resource. It is and always will be a supportive podcast resource for people who are struggling with herpes stigma. I think it's very informational to hear from the people who have the virus about their experiences living with the virus. So you can get that on the podcast. I think we're at 360 something episodes if you include the bonuses. So there's gonna come a point where I think my web host is gonna like bump out podcast episodes, but it's nice. It's nice that so many people over the last 7 years have wanted to share their experiences and have felt safe enough with me to have these sort of conversations. And the community has been super supportive, especially getting us to a place now where we know what our identity is as an organization. The podcast is a support tool and helps us with maintaining a sense of community and accessing the lived experiences of people with herpes in a way that's real, raw, and authentic. And then we
Mhm.
offer simulated experiences for trainings for healthcare professionals that I'm currently working my butt off to get funded. We were
That's
able to
so
get funded.
important.
Thank you so much. I'm so
Yeah.
excited about this. For those who haven't put it together yet, I have a guest for this podcast episode, so it won't
Hello?
be rambling or venting or anything like that. Like I've been doing on the last few, maybe not the last two. The last two are with guests. Um, but if you're watching this, you'll notice that I changed my shirt. Unlike I said I was going to, so I was like, I got in my second podcast. I was like, oh, I didn't change clothes because these were back-to-back recordings, and I had like a hour gap between my previous one and ours. So I just ran and
Mhm.
took a shower, threw some clothes on. That's why I got to wear this hat because I can't do anything to my hair until it's dry. And so since it's going to be
Yeah.
on the internet, I figured I just wear my no stigma hat. Shout out to Wisp, hellowisp.com.
I got mine
Uh,
right here.
oh,
Mine's
you
kind of
got
blown
one?
out, but I got my hat right here. I
Where?
know I should put it on. I should put it on.
Yeah.
I'm
Oh,
not
twins.
quite as cute. Not quite as good as yours, but
Oh no,
still blown
mine's
out.
just it's just worn. That's all. But yeah, the other thing we do is we train health professionals on how to the best practices for taking a sexual history. And we do that with scenarios that have been given to us through people's lived experiences, navigating stigma. And yeah, like I mean, we can, if you're interested in that, please contact me through the website. But we got funding to do this as a pilot with an organization, and we're going to be doing that in February. So between now and then, a lot of what I'll be doing is I'll still do the podcast and really just be preparing for that, because I think that that is the clear direction of Something Positive for Positive People as we move forward. All right, so today's guest is Tara. Do we say Tara or is it Tara?
Tara, I'm actually gonna pull this off because my hair is also wet.
Oh,
I'm gonna do the opposite. Don't need that
okay.
pushing it down, but yes, Tara Ransleben.
All right. Ooh, last
I
name too. Let's go.
yeah. It's on my YouTube and stuff, so it's out there. It is a blessing and a curse of a last name because I'm the only one out there, but it is very difficult to spell. And so a lot of people have some trouble with that. But once you get it right, it makes it very easy to find me. And you can do that on YouTube or Instagram. I'm also under TR Sexuality. I am a sexuality educator. I just finished my master's in sexual health from the University of Minnesota, which is very exciting. I'm also certified in human sexuality. I started with the certification, it grew into the whole master's program. So just finished that up. So that's very exciting. And now I will have the time to get back on to the YouTube and make some more content on the topic as a whole. So
All
that's
right.
my
So when you filled out your form, so anyone listening, I have like a form for people to fill out now, so I can kind of like look over it, make sure that they're okay with having their face out there, what they want to talk about, and we can, stick to topics that they're comfortable with. And I read on yours, I'm looking at it now. It said, "As we talked about dot dot dot," and I was like, not as we talked about. I don't think that was the wording that you used, but when I read it, I was oh, it said we spoke on Instagram about the video I
Yeah,
posted to, and I was sitting there, I was like, I hope like you weren't I hoped that you weren't hoping that I remembered that conversation.
it's fine. Yeah, I'm sure
Okay.
you get a billion DMs on
It's
Instagram.
maybe not a billion. I don't want to say a billion. Enough, I would say, new people. I would say maybe
Mhm.
about a dozen new people a week. A dozen new
Yeah,
people a week. Let's. That's probably a fair, accurate assessment. There's been times where it's been way more, and there have been a couple of times where it's been a little bit less. But oftentimes, like that's how it goes. Some people have been following me for a while, and then they'll reach out and say, "Hey, this thing," and we'll end up in the conversation. But for the most part, yeah, about a dozen people. I just actually my episode, which will be out right before yours, I interviewed someone who they reached out to me in 2020, I want to say 2019, 2020, about how to disclose to someone. And we lost contact. And then I looked up, I saw a picture of them. They posted that they were married on their Facebook page. I was like, who the hell is this? And I was about to delete them because I was like, I don't know who this is. And I went to our messages first and I saw the last contact we had was about disclosing. I was like, hey, is this a person that you? She's like, oh my God, yeah, we got to catch up. So we caught up and did our
amazing.
most recent podcast. So it's always nice when little things like that sort of happen. And that's partially why like I always want to talk to everybody. Anybody who reaches out, I want to make sure to, be the person that engages with them. I never want for there to be like a middleman or like a social media manager, but I think that that would have to come at some point.
At some
So
point, there's only so much one person can do.
yeah, I try so hard to like not look like I do a lot, but it's a lot. It's a lot.
It's a
It's a
lot.
lot. And as like money's coming in and we've got memberships, I'm able to do some things better. Like right now, there's someone who's working on a rebrand for the website and coming out with a logo for like something similar to the No Stigma hats, but just like some type of apparel that emphasizes minimizing stigma. So we're playing around with some different designs. We ain't got to do all that. Like this ain't supposed to be this episode. Let me stop. So let's start with how we found each other. I think you kind of introduced yourself with what you have
Yes.
going on, but if you
So,
want a clear
um,
introduction,
I
please.
know I met Dakota Rampin, who was a host at one of your events recently, a presenter at one of your events. Um, I met her very briefly at an event called Sex Down South, which is a sexuality conference well, the main one is in Atlanta. I'm Texas based. I'm in DFW. This was a pop-up event prior to that in Miami. Um, but we exchanged socials. That was about as much as we had a chance to talk. Um, but then I saw her posting about your event, and so I made my way over to your page and was telling you that I thought it was really important. And we spoke a bit because one of my videos on my YouTube, it is still quite small, my YouTube channel, but one of the videos that really took off because of the stigma is a one on herpes, because on YouTube, the more people comment, the more it's going to get pushed out to other people. And that was the one that had the most conversation in the comments, the most responses. um and it kind of just proved the point of the video as well, which was about destigmatization. um but it was really interesting to kind of see it is a thing that is um lovely and also kind of a barrier when you're surrounded by other people in communities like ours that are, very well informed and trauma educated and open, that you get this bubble of being like, oh yeah, everyone understands that there isn't this stigma. And then you go outside of that bubble and you go, oh no, it definitely hasn't moved an inch. So it that was kind of how we started talking. Was I had previous experience with doing a video on herpes and the history of the stigmatization of herpes. So that was how we connected initially.
Yeah. So you're an educator, and this was part of you educating, right? So is that what you would say your motivation was about coming out with your own experience too?
Yeah, I think I grew up in a background. My parents are lovely, but they, grew up in environments where it was not a topic of conversation. Like anything related to sex was not something you discussed at home. I mean, my mom didn't even want to tell me what a period was. Like it was that level of like, this is not a thing we talk about. Um, and they've gotten much better about that. Obviously, that kind of forced them to when I went to school for sexuality education. But it was a thing that I realized, and I grew up in a small town in the South. We didn't receive any sex education in schools. It's always been abstinence only sex education in Texas. And it was a thing that I just realized because nobody talked about it, it created even more shame and even more taboo. And the only cure to that was to have open conversations. And that was kind of the main goal with my channel was, all sorts of I kind of jump around. I have some videos that are more straightforward, sex education, anatomy. We weren't even taught sexual anatomy in schools here. So some like that, some that are a bit a bit more out there, things about like specific subgenres of like smut. So just having open conversations though was the main goal of my channel. And I try to host workshops when I can, because that's really important to me, is to be able to have a space where people can speak openly, ask questions that they're too embarrassed to ask, people around them. And yeah, that was really where it started.
So listen, you don't have to drag out your responses to anything. If
Sorry.
you done, yeah, if you're done, you can be done, and then
No, it's the ADHD. I will keep rambling and then realize I've said it already. So
no, it's all good. So you mentioned that the comments, the more people comment, the more a video takes off. I've never gotten any negativity or criticism online for anything I'm doing, and I think partially one is because I'm a man, two because I'm a black man talking about this, and three, you are a complete asshole if you have anything negative to say about somebody who's like, hey, people with herpes want to kill themselves, so here, like, don't kill yourselves. Like
yeah.
any that negative, it feels like I'm immune from it, or I'm immune to it, right? So I imagine that if the video took off, you got a lot of comments. What were some of those comments? I don't want to assume negativity, but I think there was a lot of.
There was quite a bit of negativity. It was a lot of, I think part of it was the title was maybe a bit provocative. People got a little personally attacked. The title of the video is "I have herpes and you probably do too," which I think is a fair statement based on the stats we have about HSV. But a lot of the comments were quite defensive. A lot of people clearly hadn't watched the video. Maybe they just read the title and immediately commented. And it kind of veered between uh, a lot of like spiritual, like there were some comments about herpes being a demon and needing to spiritually cleanse yourself in order to remove the demon. And I'm like, listen, have an exorcism if you want, but also go to Planned Parenthood and get yourself an antiviral prescription. We can do both here. And then there were definitely some like slut shaming sort of comments as well, which is something that comes with the territory in at least that side, especially for a woman making videos on the topic of sexuality as a whole. Um, Luckily, some of the worst ones got filtered out by YouTube, which I guess is a good thing. But in my opinion, like if anyone came out and directly attacked me, that was never an issue. I don't care. I don't know you. I don't care what you think about me. But for me, the negative comments I really felt like were a place where I needed to reiterate the message that I was trying to say in the video, because I didn't want anyone to come across the video, watch it, maybe feel a bit more supported, and then read the comments and have that immediately, apologies, she's going to interrupt, immediately feel invalidated when they read those comments. And so it was a, a bit exhausting on my end, but also I feel like a further re-education opportunity when you get those comments to be like, well, no, actually, this is the reality of the situation.
I don't know if I've ever really felt that it's useful to engage with those kinds of people, because the way that I've interpreted, like seeing other people's comments, people send me stuff all the time about a person posted this herpes video and look at the comments, right? So yeah, I look and I read through, and I've gone through sometimes and been like, hey, that's not cool. Some people with herpes want to kill themselves. Like if anybody else is seeing this and you're struggling with that, go to spfpp.org. And in doing that, I've not directly received negativity, but I see those spaces and like I'll go there, say that, maybe I get a few likes. But there's always been a person who reaches out and is just thankful to me for that. And I don't have it in me to do that every time somebody sends me one of those videos. And like, I think that there would be so much more impact against stigma if the person who sent it to me were just willing to be like, hey, people with herpes sometimes want to kill themselves, and this doesn't help. If you need support, go to spfpp.org. And there's strength in numbers, first off. And I think people oftentimes feel a little bit bullied out of the space or out of that position of advocacy, especially when you do so much internal work on yourself to get to a place of even being able to tell someone that you want to have sex with that you have herpes. And now, strangers on the internet carry just as much weight, and we're just like, no, I don't, these are the last people that I want to know, because more number quantity of people are going to know. And then I don't know what people think is going to happen, but you've received this criticism yourself in your comments, right? And what's happened to you?
I mean, there's definitely a point where you have to be like, there's no arguing with this person. That some people are just set, and the more you try and educate, the more they're going to double down. But I think it has been a situation where I have also received people from those sorts of comments who were like, hey, thank you for correcting that, or thank you for this. And it is a thing that at first really bothered me. I would get kind of in my head about making sure that I had to correct these people, like they're not telling the truth, they don't understand. And then after a certain point I was like, no, my mental health is gonna be the priority here, because unless my mental health is there, I'm not going to be able to continue making the videos. And there are plenty of other comments in there that were people who were, supportive or agreeing or offering other resources. And I think that's really encouraging to see.
Hmm. Yeah. And in this advocacy space, like, have you planned to be an advocate for herpes education, or is this just a part of the work that you do, especially as a sex educator? Sex
Yes.
educator?
Yeah.
Okay.
Um, no, I never went in specifically to say anything about herpes. I think it was that video specifically came up because I was having an outbreak myself. I mean, you can see I have HSV1, oral HSV1. It's something I've had since I was a child. I have no idea when I contracted it, but I even put a picture of my cold sore in the thumbnail of the video, and it was something that I was dealing with at the time. So I said, let's talk about this. And my undergrad degree is actually in creative writing. My dad's a big history buff, so like I'm really into the story of things. I want to know why the message that we have now is the message that we have. Where did this come from? And it turned into this really fascinating look at how this sort of stigma sort of blew up out of nowhere. It became this manufactured fear that we've all had, despite the fact that herpes is a virus that's existed since people have existed. And the difference between the way we react to something like herpes versus the chicken pox, which is also a herpes zoster virus, right? Nobody's gonna shame you for having had the chicken pox at some point in your life. But if you have a cold sore or a visible manifestation of herpes, or if they find out that you have a herpes diagnosis, there is a completely different connotation related to that. And that was kind of part of that video, was one being like, hey, this is a thing that I'm experiencing. This is a thing that's related to the sort of work I do, and two, why do we feel this way?
Hmm. Having oral herpes or cold sores and then being open about that on the internet, has that impacted your dating life at all?
Um, I wouldn't say so. I have been in a relationship with my current partner for about a year, and that video is maybe a year and a half old. He also has cold sores, HSV1. I don't think either of us have had an outbreak since we started dating, but it is something that came up fairly early, I believe. I think because I was talking about this video, and it didn't really have that impact that a disclosure of genital herpes has. There is so much more stigma attached to a genital herpes
Yeah.
diagnosis than there is for, and a lot of it is in just the name, right? You can say I have a cold sore, and that doesn't sound quite as extreme as saying, oh, I have herpes. There is an assumption when you say I have herpes that you're discussing genital herpes. So
Mhm. And speaking of discussing genital herpes, since that's not something that you deal with, do you have to talk about oral herpes with partners?
it, I think, is a thing that, like I said, because people are so much more comfortable with it isn't usually a topic that comes up. I like to disclose as early as I can, as early as I think about it. It is kind of the blessing of something that is slightly less stigmatized, right? That you don't have to think about it. Uh, Obviously, if I have an outbreak, that is something that has to be disclosed at that point. It's obvious, it's apparent. Not that I'm trying to hide it, but it becomes very easy to disclose when you can say, like, hey, look at my face, let's take a break for however long this takes to heal up. But it's, like I said, I've not really been in the dating world in the last, since that video, but I've
Oh,
had,
did you have herpes before the video?
yes,
Or
yes.
how long before the video did you have herpes? I mean,
I honestly don't know when. It was something I contracted as a child. And I think that was a big thing in the comments, right? Was this assumption that if you have herpes, well, this conflation of herpes with STIs.
mhm.
This, everyone, one of the arguments I made, like I said earlier, was that nobody's going to shame you for having chickenpox, but they are going to shame you for having herpes. And some of the comments were saying, well, yes, because you have a choice in engaging in sexual activity. And first of all, not everyone has a choice. There are
Thank you.
plenty of situations where someone has not consented, or maybe not had the informed consent. And second of all, who cares if you chose to have sex? Like that's a moral judgment that has nothing to do with the reality of a virus. In the same way, if you have the flu, you know, you're going to stay away from people and try not to transmit it, but nobody's going to tell you you're a bad person because you have the flu. But as soon as you add sex into the equation, people immediately pull in this like intense moral judgment of I'm clean and you're unclean, which is such dangerous rhetoric around anything, the topic of sexuality, the topic of health. It's not useful.
No. And you earlier spoke to the quality of sex education that we've received or lack thereof or poor quality thereof. What do you envision, you know, if more, I guess, people were exposed to this kind of information, or if the sex education that we receive was better? How do you think that that would help, or how would it affect STI prevention efforts and programs?
I think the cure to shame is education. The cure to shame is open conversations. And shame is such a strong barrier for people reaching out and getting help, getting medical care, getting tested. Because a lot of people would rather be in denial than have a confirmed diagnosis. But there's so much shame involved in getting tested, and there's also so much shame in other people knowing you're getting tested, and shame in disclosing, and sex as a whole has a lot of shame attached to it in our culture. As I said, especially in the South, especially when you're not having the education, you're receiving a lot of messaging around sexuality and moral messaging around sexuality. The cure to all of that is to talk about it and to be educated on it.
And who's more like, whose responsibility is it? Do we put it on teachers in schools at young ages? Do we put it on STI prevention, health professionals, or do we put it on the people? And like, when I was talking to Dr. Nas, whose episode would have been 2 episodes before this one, that was kind of one of the things that we spoke about. We spoke about like layering it. Just like how Dakota Rampin, who's on Instagram at Get Real with Dakota, she shared that in her stigma minimization talk for youth education, that we should incorporate, you know, boundary setting for encouraging youth to be able to speak about their needs, what safety feels like to them, what communicating about their health means, what things they like, what things they don't like. They really should be able to speak to these things, and we don't give them that. If they had that, then we can layer on other things that will begin to apply once they shift into the age ranges of going into relationships and navigating those friendships, relationships in that way. So I asked just to kind of see what, you know, your thoughts were on what that could look like.
Absolutely. It is kind of a multi-level thing. It is, we need better funding from government organizations. We need fewer restrictions related to education systems, because as it is in Texas, it is a state regulation that you are not allowed to teach in schools anything other than abstinence-based sex education, which we know doesn't work. We have so much research to prove it doesn't work. It's never worked. In fact, it usually increases STI rates and teen pregnancy rates. So, you know, whether you go from the top down and change policy related to that, but there's also community outreach and parent level. I mean, it is at every level where we just need to be more comfortable having these conversations. Like Dakota said, creating these baseline understandings for children of their anatomy, the correct terms for their anatomy, so that they can communicate correctly about anything that happens to them or anything that they do. Being able to have conversations around boundaries and consent, and then moving up into conversations around healthy relationships, communication, protection, all of those things. And also recognition that sexual health is just an element of your health. Sexual health is a right. Sexual health is no different from any other part of your physical health. And there doesn't need to be a moral stigma attached to it.
Yeah, I think that we do a lot of disservice. I think we actually make it worse. I say this pretty often that, and when I say we as in the general population of adults who are in the sex education space that have limited, what you said, funding, that are limited to only being able to talk about uh, um, abstinence only sex education as well. And our backs are kind of against the wall because if we've got these regulations, right, how do we do anything about stigma, especially in these places where it's so rampant? And it's so rampant because of misinformation or lack of education, the dishonesty, the withholding of information, because this abstinence only sex education is not doing anything for um, teen pregnancies or unwanted pregnancies. It's not doing anything for minimizing or reducing STI cases, right? So we we're doing so much working around where if we just got the support that we needed from the institutions, from the parents, like we everybody likes to think, not my child, not my child. And I believe that a lot of parents are thinking that what sex educators talk to youth about is how to have sex. And no, that's not the case. Like they're very misinformed about sex education being intercourse education. No, porn is way more accessible for intercourse education. And even there's another conversation to be had regarding that. So I don't really know what can be done for these abstinence only, pro abstinence only places, other than that this just feeds into a perfectly designed system that perpetuates this cycle of these unwanted pregnancies or these unplanned pregnancies, as well as these continuing STI rates that fuel these ecosystems of the public health field or the health education. I don't know, but there's something to be said there.
And that was a huge part of why I wanted to make content online. I feel like in places where you're not able to access that information in schools or from your parents, what are you going to do? You're going to Google it. And there's so much misinformation online as well. I wanted to create a space where the education that was there was researched and backed up and accurate to the best of my abilities and interesting as well. Kids aren't going to be reading CDC recommendations for sexual health, but they might watch a video if it seems interesting to them.
hmm I would like for you to, of course, send me that video so that I can share it. And then, yeah, it'd be interesting to see like what's been going on with that lately, um, especially as more people. Like I see the search history of not her search history, but I see the analytics for people who search for something positive for positive people. And interesting enough, Texas, um, and Texas, Florida are two of the top states, and Georgia. And these are, I believe, where we see a lot of this abstinence only sex
Mm-hmm.
education. Um, and these are where some of the most searches for herpes are being done. So it's actually, spot on that this is something that's contributing to the necessity of something positive for positive people. And it shouldn't be.
Right. And the other part of the policy is that it limits the resources that you have in person in places like Texas and Florida and Georgia, because a lot of Planned Parenthoods had to shut down. A lot of community centers don't have the funding or have to fight policies in order to continue running their business, and it just isn't profitable enough to continue to serve the communities. there's only so much you can do without any funding. And luckily I am in uh, a more metropolitan area in Texas. I'm in the Dallas Fort Worth area, and we have some resources, but so much of Texas is rural. And like I said, I grew up in a very small town. I would have had to have driven at least an hour to go to a Planned Parenthood or any sort of sexual health clinic like that if
Yeah.
I didn't have access to a car or money, or I had super restrictive parents that I was trying to work around. That's just not an option for a lot of people, whether they're adolescents or adults. You know, if you're working all day, like you're not necessarily going to be able to receive in-person resources in areas where they're just not accessible. So it makes online work as dicey as it can get online with censored, you know, YouTube censors some of my videos. I don't know if you deal with that at all with your content. If you run into a lot of having to like write your words wrong in order to get it not censored, that sort of thing. Yeah.
Yeah, there's a lot of things that I should be doing that I just haven't been able to. I need to be on TikTok.
Oh, yeah.
I dread TikTok, but I recognize the necessity of it. Like I have to do it. And at the end of it all, right? What's most important is that the information be there so that those who need it can find it when they need it, more so than for it to, be done right. Like I'd rather be consistent than have it perfect, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's my like philosophy on all of this as far as putting the content out. So, as frustrating as it is for us to deal with the barriers that we have to face as people who just want to educate, people who want to help, at the end of it, it's also rewarding as well. So, um, I'm feeling like just from you sharing about YouTube, I've been thinking about it since I pulled up your chart. I was like, man, I really should do more with YouTube. I have the podcast, people find it. I have the social media, but if I'm able to find people who are willing to be interviewed like this, then what's stopping me from being able to record the video content and put it out there? Who knows? Maybe somebody who's like interested in or connected to giving us some funding may listen. Somebody who's like feeling really driven to help, wants to give a donation, or somebody wants to share their story on a podcast, right? So I feel that, and I thank you for being willing and able to reconnect with me so that we can arrange the time to have this conversation too.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you. Uh,
Yeah.
do you find that the more in-person work you do feels, I don't want to say more validating, because it's validating in a different way, right? To do in-person work, to see an actual reaction on someone's face versus receiving comments on the internet. But how do you feel like it's different for you? Because I've also done some in-person work, and it is a very different environment.
I think online, people have more safety and anonymity. And I ain't gonna say they trust you more, but like there's more rapport that can be built. I don't really know how long somebody's been engaging with something positive for positive people. And oftentimes I think others might feel like they know me a lot better than they actually do. Right. So they're like, oh my God, I heard you say everything there is to say about herpes. Like I feel like we know each other. It's like, yeah, but what about the other 99.9% of my life? Like this is so insignificant to me. In terms of what is a priority in my life, right? Like when I think about virtually and engaging with people online, I think that it's quantity. It's a lot of people, high volume. We don't really have a lot of time to engage and interact. And in those brief interactions, right? Like some people might say, "Oh my God, I didn't expect you to message me back." I'm like, "Well, why wouldn't I?" Right? And then when it's in person, the amount of the amount of emotions that I would say a person might need to navigate in order to show up. I remember I hosted a herpes disclosure workshop in New York City. About 14 people showed up in person and 60 people total signed up. And I want to say about 40 showed up online. And one of the guys who came, like we messaged over Instagram briefly, and then he showed up, and I know how hard that was for him. He was like, "No, I don't want to be on a camera. Like, I don't want to nobody talk to me." And as he felt more comfortable with me talking and other people, like getting others involved and people sharing their experiences, he's like, "Man, you know what? Fuck it. I'd be on camera. Let's all take a picture together, right?" And it was that. I don't think I get that online. I don't get the
Mhm.
the evolution from like shoulders down, hunched forward, kind of hiding to leaning in, being engaged, to being a little bit like, do I want to say something? To finally recognizing that it's okay for them to exist. It's okay for them to be there. And that is probably what I get out of in-person stuff more is the actual in-person transformative
Mhm.
happening of a person's experience from the time that they show up to the time that they show up for themselves.
Yeah, I
Before,
have
thank you.
done, yeah, of course. Um, I've done a few in-person events, mostly through some LGBTQ youth centers. Like one I did, I think a year ago, maybe like 6 months ago. I'm not sure exactly when. Was a workshop for parents of uh, queer or gender nonconforming youth in order to have that conversation with their kids about sex. Because, if parents have never received sex ed, which they probably haven't if they grew up here, how are they supposed to communicate with their kids about it? How are they supposed to have, the talk or have, continuous talks as you should really be doing, especially when it comes to parents of queer or trans kids? Like, you're definitely not getting that sex education, and it's probably not something that you've experienced either. You don't have your own experiences. So doing that in-person event, it was very different to see the engagement in person, and when you're doing a YouTube video, you do the whole thing, and then maybe someone says something to you later, and you don't get the immediate back and forth. You don't get the immediate faces lighting up when they understand something or they're learning something new. And it is both validating, both incredibly important, but it is a very interesting difference between the two types of work.
Yeah, I like the in person, and we gained a bit from COVID and we lost a bit from COVID. We gained, more quality online virtual opportunities to engage when it makes sense. Um, and we're now at a place where there's such a desire for that. I think people need that in person, that presence. People are longing for that because there was so much time where we one couldn't have that, and two, like for the time that we didn't get that, um, I think that the need for it became much more prevalent, right? Like we are longing to connect with other people who are like us. We want community. We need that. Like I think that we really have recognized the importance of it, being able to heal in community, and that's one of the things that I would say through something positive for positive people that we've been able to cultivate is some aspect of community. One person who's listening to me and you have a conversation may feel more seen and more of a sense of community and connectedness than they feel with their best friends or in their relationship or with their family. And I think that this offers that kind of an opportunity. But if we're able to, get in person with a dozen other people who all have this shared experience, who, the need to talk about this is irrelevant because we're just so present to whatever it is that's happening. We're able to more so engage with that thing than, and we don't really care about anything else.
Mhm.
Mic drop. So Tara, is there anything else that you want to leave us with? Do you have any other questions for me? I think that this was a good conversation, particularly from a lens of the importance of sexuality education, the importance of being able to have conversations, even not just with youth, but or not just in a classroom setting, but even in the general public, right? Like anybody can engage on the internet when they see these comments. If you're in a place to do so, I'm not asking that anybody like do that emotional labor without, knowing where they are. Like I ain't saying just jump out there and start commenting on stuff, ripping people a new one. But I think that it's more effective. Like my energy can go towards the bigger picture of what this movement is, which is cultivating community, organizing, and going to the healthcare organizations directly so that we can have them be better equipped for engaging with somebody with herpes or the general public about how to talk about their sexual health. And I would really like to see more people just get involved. I'd like to see that. Oh,
Yeah,
that
I think.
all that to say, do you have anything else?
No, I second everything you just said. It is so much about having those conversations, and it doesn't necessarily have to be commenting online. That can be quite harrowing place for a lot of people. Um, but having the conversations with the people you interact with on a regular basis, like obviously read the room, don't make anyone uncomfortable or ask any too personal questions, but being willing to open yourself up allows people to open themselves as well. Like you said with the person who wasn't sure about coming to the event and how they visibly relaxed in the company of other people being willing to be open and share. If you're willing to have open conversations with the people around you, you'll be surprised often that you can have really productive, healthy, open conversations and learn about each other and feel so much more connection and relief and that you're a part of community than you may have ever realized. And you can learn in a ways that you may not have realized you could learn before.
Amen. All right. So, how can people find you? Just first name, last name.
Yes, you can either just look up Tara Ransleben, Tara. The last name is Ransleben, or TR Sexuality. TR_sexuality is my Instagram. That has links to everything there. So that's probably a bit easier. TR_sexuality is the Instagram. Links from there.
Perfect. All right. Well, thank you. Thank you so much for your time. Thank you for being willing to be a guest on the podcast. If you can stay on just for a bit after I do the outro, we can debrief a bit. Okay.
Okay. Thank you.
Perfect. All right, y'all. That concludes this episode of Something Positive for Positive People. Please like, rate, review, share, subscribe to this podcast. You can also donate to continue to support our cause. We are working towards being able to conduct these simulations in a way that we can record it, talk about it, take data, so that we can present this to the CDC and be like, yo, we're training healthcare professionals on taking the history. Like, give us funding so that we can do this in a way that minimizes new infections by teaching people how to talk about their sexual health as well as talk about it with their patients. So, yeah, we're working towards that. The podcast is up. Please continue to listen. If you want to be a guest, you can visit the podcast tab, spfpp.org/podcast today, and just fill in that form for me. And I got you. We can have a conversation like this one, or if you want to talk about, something else under the realm of your herpes diagnosis, honestly, or if it's something else. Like if anybody finds this podcast, I know that herpes is generally the topic of discussion, but that's not the entirety of it, right? Like we had episodes about just relationships and dating. So don't be afraid to reach out and see what we can come together and co-create with. Come together and co-create with. I said that wrong. But anyway, all right, y'all. That's it. Don't forget, we've got September 29th, NYC. Hit me up, space. It's going to be the Safe Sex Expo. This is going to be a great time. We're reaching out to sponsors and vendors now. We got the space secured, and now we got the workshop presenters as well. So we'll see what we come up with as far as vendors and the marketing materials. That's on the website, spfpp.org/events. And you can scroll down to see what interests you. And if you can join in person, join us in person in New York City on September 29th, which is a Sunday, at the Safe Sex Expo. Till next time.